Hello, world.
Hi.
Me llamo Jeff. Uh, Hopefully, you know this guy. I do. I've known him my whole life. He was there the day I emerged. And then he came here that day to preach. It was Easter Sunday, 1975. I was born at 4 something in the morning.
Yeah, about 4:30.
And so you came from Longmont United Hospital to come here to go to work.
Well, I went home first. Woke up your brother and sister. Took them to Sunday school.
So there is dedication in this family to this place.
Right.
Some might say misplaced. But it's been in our blood to be here at Grace Church and to be doing what we can for the kingdom here. And it's amazing that I get to serve here where he served. Fortunately, there was a 30-year gap.
Yeah.
So I'm not really a prophet in my hometown. But anyway, we want to come to you today together with my dad, Jerry Foote, as our special guest for a couple of reasons. Number one, because we want to talk today about how adult education works here at Grace Church, why it's valuable for your spiritual growth, for discipleship, what it is, what it isn't, what we're doing this summer. And he is the ministry leader over adult education here at the church. And also because the recap of Sunday that we're doing for this Tuesday breakdown is 2 Corinthians chapter 5, which I love. It's one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. And I think it is your actual number one favorite chapter in the Bible.
It's hard to say, but probably.
So I thought, why should I just ramble on about the chapter when I can have the expert ramble on about the chapter? So if you haven't met, I'm Jeff. This is my dad, Jerry Foote. This is everybody.
Hi.
So you may need to make sure you speak loudly because we found out we have volume issues on YouTube.
Okay.
So I know you can yell.
I have a loud voice at times.
Especially when I misbehaved at 8 years old. Actually, this is a weird thing. You guys might not know this. I never heard him yell. I never saw you and Mom fight. We had a very peaceful home until I started yelling at Mom because I was an idiot teenager. But it was a very calm house, very peaceful place.
Yeah.
And
I did yell at you when you were playing baseball or basketball, and I was in the stands.
And I was usually yelling at the referees or the umpires. I've always had a big mouth. So where do you want to start? You want to do 2 Corinthians or you want to do the adult ed? Or we could pick a third topic.
Let's do adult ed.
Okay. So what's the difference between small groups and adult ed?
We have these handy flyers that describe our ministries.
Okay.
There's one for small groups. There's one for adult ed.
Okay.
And it says on here, right on the back, our adult ed classes are the classroom part of our discipleship ministries. We believe that God has revealed himself in his word and that we are called to study and apply what he has told us. This does not mean that it is academic or focused only on knowledge. It is to be life-changing. The classroom setting allows us to study the Bible in community, guided by well-prepared teachers. I love that last sentence. I wish I had written it.
You did write it.
I did write it.
You did write it.
The classroom setting allows us to study the Bible in community, guided by well-prepared teachers. And right now, last fall and then this spring, we've had a little over 100 students attending the classes on Sunday morning and Wednesday night combined. That is maybe 1/4 of the adults in our church. We'd like to see that grow. We'd like to see more people come out. We have room in most of the classes. Some of them have been pretty large. But we do have room for people this summer, and especially in the fall, we'll be really gearing up with a big schedule. So I would encourage people to find a class that they can attend. We especially want to show the core classes, and that was your idea, to come up with a core group of classes that are like foundational to everything. And we have 8 of those right now. We may be adding another one because the class John taught on interpreting the Bible, it probably deserves to be one of those core classes too. It lays the foundation for all the study you're going to do of the Bible.
Yeah. So I'll answer. There's like 8 things I want to ask in reply. So let's try and take them or as organized as we can be on these ranting videos, these breakdown videos. So for me, the difference between adult ed and small groups, they are both relational discipleship, right? It's not like the classroom setting is devoid of relationships, because if it's not relational, it's not ministry. But the nature of, I wish I had written that too. I did. But actually, I think Jesus wrote that, or the gospel writers wrote that. He said, make disciples by baptizing, going, and teaching. And so you need all 3 of those components. And part of making disciples, which is the goal of the church, the mission of every Bible-based church, really is to make disciples. You don't need a committee to come up with that. It's very clearly the mission of Jesus: go and make disciples. So the question then is, what's the best way to do that? How do we do that? And it needs this combination of community and content. This combination of the relationships and the teaching element, so that we're growing in our understanding as well as our relationships and love, and the great commandment to love the Lord your God with your mind, heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So the purpose of adult ed is to provide the relational network, but is primarily content driven by a well-equipped teacher who is teaching us to obey all that Jesus has commanded. Whereas the small group is more relationally based without as much content. But again, the small group is not missing content and the classroom is not missing relationships. It's just you have a little bit of a prioritization there. And so you can go deeper relationally in your small groups, and you can go deeper in content in the classroom. And we feel like we need them both. And in some ways they overlap, but we also want to make sure they're treated as 2 separate things. And not everybody can commit to Sunday plus small group plus adult ed, but it would be nice if you could. But we would ask, if Grace is your church home, that you're committing to Sundays and one of the other 2. And so with the adult ed, we offer during trimesters. There's a winter-spring trimester, there's a summer trimester, there's a fall-winter trimester. And this would be the first time we're really doing the summer.
Since we had to shut down.
Since we had to shut down for pandemic reasons. And so we're not offering a lot, but we are offering some on Sundays and Wednesday nights through the summer, because we don't want to stop making disciples just because it's June. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between the core classes and then the electives? You said I came up with it, but I'll let you explain it.
Actually, don't tell Jeff this, but the core classes are to help every adult and older teen in our church understand the Bible the way Jeff does. Because it's most of the time when Christians study the Bible, or they have classes for things, we boil it down to a simplified form. We leave a lot of the Bible out. And if you look at the edge, the pages of most people's Bible, you can tell where they read, because it's obviously looser. The pages are closer together in some sections because they haven't been there as often.
Right, but they've been to the Bible study through John. They've been to the Bible study through Galatians.
And Romans.
And James.
Maybe some Psalms. And so, but a lot of the Bible gets left out, and a lot of the doctrine and teaching of the Bible gets left out. When you see Jeff preaching on Sunday morning, what often goes through your mind, and it does me, wow, how did he not understand that? How did he explain that so clearly? Well, it's because he has this whole Bible background of understanding. And of course, we never get it all. We keep learning that. But the core classes are an attempt to give everybody that foundation that goes from Genesis to Revelation, not just as knowing the main events or the timeline or the moral stories, but understanding the message of the Bible, which is the gospel, from beginning to end. And instead of trying to see how simplified we can make it, reductionistic we can make it, we want to fill in as much of the picture as we can, so we have more to draw upon when we're reading Judges, or we're reading 1 Timothy, or whatever it is. We want to be able to see how that fits into the flow of the whole Bible. And so our core classes are a roadmap of the Old Testament, roadmap of the New Testament, the statement of faith of our church, the doctrinal statement, the storylines of the gospel. And that usually we say the gospel can be put in a 4-page tract, but it really can't.
Statement of faith, 10-point doctrinal statement within the free church. We do a class fleshing all that out.
So we also have a class on transformation. How do we keep growing as a Christian? We have a class on biblical wisdom, and then one that you started last fall, walking in the Spirit, so that you have a conversational relationship with God in your daily life. So those are the foundational things that then you build on that by studying books of the Bible, or doctrines, or disciplines of the Christian life, or practical ways you can apply it in your life. So though the electives, there's no limit to those, but we do want to have this 8 or 9 core classes that form the foundation. You don't have to take them in a particular order, but we do want everyone in the church to eventually take all of those.
Yeah, and the reason for that is we go back to this: what does it mean to make disciples? What is the minimum viable product? That's a business term. Mm-hmm. To accomplish disciple making. What are the key things? Because someday I'm going to have to stand before the Lord. You're going to have to stand before the Lord with, how did you do the job I asked you to do? We're going to need to have an answer to that question. Mm-hmm. And the job he's asked us to do is to make disciples. So it goes back to a lot of the parables. The master puts workers, or puts servants or stewards over the workers, and then they're accountable to the master when he comes back. And with that idea of, what can we say we have done in ministry to make disciples? That's kind of how I wrote our new members class, the Elements class, is what do I need to be able to say to sleep at night that I have made sure everybody who calls this their church home understands. Mm-hmm. The gospel, loving your neighbor, loving God, loving your enemies, God's love for you. Like, that's baked into that content. And if you extrapolate that a little wider, what are the things we want to make sure everybody who is pursuing discipleship in our church understands? That's what this list is.
Yeah.
How to read your Bible, what the truth of the gospel is, how does it transform us, what does it mean to walk with the Spirit? Mm-hmm. That's what these core classes are for. So if you haven't done, like, if this is your church home and you haven't participated in any of these classes, this is where to start. Yeah. Would be one of these core classes. And every trimester, we're going to offer a small number of these core classes.
The one this summer is the New Testament Bible Roadmap. So if you're going to be able to do it this summer, and we ask each teacher, particularly in the core classes, to provide a way to make up if you miss. And I know summer is a lot of times people are in and out, and there is a way to make up absences. Mm-hmm. It isn't just showing up once in a while and saying, I took that class. We want to have some expectations of the teachers and of the students to say, no, you haven't taken the class if you just show up 2 or 3 times. Right. You have to make sure that you get the gist of the whole course.
And what I noticed, and you might want to speak to this too, like in the fall, when the Holy Spirit class was happening, we had a big crowd mm-hmm. coming every week. In the spring, we had 4 or 5 snowouts on Wednesday nights. Yeah. But what I've noticed is the topic of the class, or maybe the teacher of the class, tends to bring out more people. Like mm-hmm. John's Sunday how to interpret scripture class was pretty full.
Well, that included high school,
and adults.
And they should be involved in adult. Yeah.
And are you okay with that? Like, that some classes there's 4 people, some classes there's 12 people, some classes there's 50 people.
Yeah.
Is that part of the design?
I'm okay with it. I'd like to see every class full. And we try to offer each trimester enough good classes that people have a hard time picking. I think that's healthy. Mm-hmm. When they say, wait, why can't I take both of these? Because we want it to be quality stuff. and life-changing stuff.
Yeah. And then you have the flip side of the people who never miss a Sunday because they're baked into Sunday school thinking. What do you say to the person who's like, but I want the same teacher for 3 years. I want to go through Isaiah and I want to get through all 66 chapters with the same teacher, with the same class. Why are you making us stop every 14 weeks?
Well, we did that in the winter, spring trimester. We did the whole book of Isaiah.
Oh, okay.
And with the same teacher, Mark Stewart.
Yeah.
Did a great job. So you can do that. Obviously, you don't get as deep when you do it in 4 months as you would if you spent several years on it. But I think that we do have, we like a certain style, maybe a group of people that go to class together. And in some ways, you've become a small group with that instead of a class. And so it's going to limit the amount of content and maybe even life change that could be possible. So I think the important thing is how does this help me get to know God better? How do I let him accomplish in my life what he's called me to be?
And just a reminder to you who are watching this, the heart behind all of this is that we're in the disciple-making business. And so we want to put all of our energy towards that. And there's certain things that we do as a church that I would say should be bigger priorities than other things we do as a church.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain things that are great to do, and our calendar is always full of things. But if I were to tell you, hey, these are priorities, if this is your church home, I think you ought to do, it would be adult ed and small groups, because that's where relational discipleship really happens. As much fun as we can have on a Sunday, corporate worship is very much a priority here. Preaching the word, for me, obviously, that's my number one thing on my job description. I love to do it. It doesn't manifest relational discipleship the same way adult ed and small groups can. Sunday mornings are not necessarily the best time for relational connection, unfortunately. But in the classroom on Sunday mornings, you can. On Wednesday nights, you can. And we're offering these classes only at times we also have children's ministry available at this point. Yeah. So if you have kids and you're like, I don't want to have time to do that, I can't take out another night of the week, these classes are available Sundays and Wednesdays when we have children's ministry available. This summer, however, is that what you're going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to branch out here.
Jump in.
And you said on this very show, there's no tradition like a new tradition.
There's no tradition like a new tradition.
Yeah. And so the classroom model, we have built rooms in the building and we can do that. But that's not the only way, and maybe not even the best way to learn to be a disciple. And so we're looking into alternatives. When John had that Bible interpretation class, we combined adults with teenagers. And it seemed like it was easier for the teenagers to do that than for the adults, from what I've heard. But it was good. Mm-hmm. And this summer, we are having an intergenerational class studying the book of James. It'll be Wednesday nights. Pastor James is going to lead it. It's not the author of the book.
Unfortunately, he's
not available.
Deceased. But Pastor James is very much alive.
Yes.
And available.
And so we'll have children, maybe some teenagers, although the youth program is going on at that same time, parents, grandparent age, and we've got a good balance of people signed up. Still room for more. If you want to sign up for that on Wednesday night, it'll be 6:30 to 8 on Wednesday nights, starting the 25th of May. So that's just a little bit of pushing the boundaries out, trying something new. We're also considering some off-campus things that would happen in someone's backyard, that we can do discipleship there too. Mm-hmm. And it can be done in other types of settings, like a retreat type of setting, or in someone's living room, or even coffee shop, or we're just looking at how can we get this out. I would like to try a small class, maybe a dozen or less, that would take place on a mountain trail. We'd be hiking along together and teaching while we do that.
That kind of sounds like, I think I've heard of that style.
Yeah.
Teaching as they walk.
Yeah.
I can't quite place it, but I think I've heard of that before.
It has happened, I'm sure.
Okay, so keep your eyes focused on that. We've got sign-up sheets that'll be available this Sunday for the summer stuff, and then we'll ramp it up again in the fall. This is the adult ed focus today because of our special guest, but small groups follow the same calendar, and we're going to be pushing those as well heading into the fall. Summer small groups are, and it's kind of like adult ed. It's a little tough to know who's going to be around and vacation schedules. And you know what? We're okay with that. The church is called literally grace.
Yeah, and our small group's going to plan to go through the summer.
Yeah,
but we know it won't be everyone every week.
So that's good. I want to spend our last 10 minutes here talking about 2 Corinthians 5.
Sounds good.
So what happened to me on Sunday, I always like to share my experience of Sunday, is I know 2 Corinthians 5 so well in my head. I had written just the first 10 verses, a sermon based on the outline of that. And I realized you can't preach part of the flow of thought from chapter 4 to the end of chapter 5. So I thought, how can I hone it into just these 10 verses? And then I realized when I got here Sunday, I was going through my notes, I just couldn't. And so I punted. And I decided I'm just going to own it, and I'm going to preach chapter 4 and the second half of chapter 5 while I preach verses 1 to 10 of chapter 5. Which means if you come back this week, you're going to get the second half of chapter 5, which will also be the first half of chapter 5 and chapter 4. How would you skin this cat?
Well, the chapters and verses weren't in the original writings. They were added to help us find our way around. So I don't think we need to necessarily go by the chapter divisions. And certainly this is a continuing argument that Paul is giving and that God is giving to us. And for the sake of time, if we only have an hour and 15 minutes a week to get together, you have to kind of chop it up in pieces, but you have to also connect it to what was before and what comes afterwards. So as part of an ongoing process, I guess it's like watching a soap opera. You get a little recap of what happened last time, and then now
previously on 2 Corinthians.
Yeah. And be with us next time when such and such is going to happen. So you have to tie it together and have it like an ongoing dialogue about what God has said. But it's so deep and so rich, especially talking about how God changes us. We're not the same people that we used to be. We're more like what he intended. And we're growing more into that.
Yeah,
and so that we can represent him to the world around us. And that starts way back in chapter 3 when he talks about being changed into the image of God by the Spirit of God, and then how that works through to proclaiming reconciliation in the name of the gospel.
So back in chapter 3, the theme of that week was the Spirit. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is truth, there's freedom, there's like the things that the Spirit does.
Yeah.
So that the veil is removed, right? That's chapter 3. So we all with unveiled face can understand and bear the glory of God.
From glory to glory.
Yeah. And then in chapter 4, though, he kind of shifts and says, but that glory doesn't come from us. And kind of the sentence I came up with for chapter 4 to kind of summarize it is, the more we acknowledge our brokenness, the more unbreakable we become.
Yeah.
And that kind of embrace the brokenness so that the glory can shine through, treasures in jars of clay, chapter 4. Outward, we're wasting away. Inward, we're being renewed. And then you get into chapter 5, which is...
It's now and then.
Okay.
What happens now and what's going to happen in the future.
The tent, the building, the body, the nakedness, the mortal being swallowed up in life.
And because he died for all, we all died. But now that we're alive, we live for him. So the connection between the present and the future is given there. And
therefore, we're compelled by the love of Christ to be his ambassadors because he died. Like here's the thing. 2 Corinthians 5, it's like the tapestry of 1,000 threads that all are connected, but you could peel any one of them and go down a rabbit hole of theology that you'll never get to the bottom of because it's so profound. So just at the beginning, the tent versus the building. He's talking about tents and buildings, but he's talking about our bodies. But he's also talking about all of Earth existence. pre New Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So he's talking, is it a tent? Yes. Is it a body? Yes. Because then he talks about but it's also clothes.
Mm-hmm.
So which is it? He's got like 8 metaphors all just combining and crashing into one. How do you preach that?
Yeah.
Well,
speaking of metaphors, in verse 20 of that chapter, it says, now we are ambassadors for Christ. As though God were speaking through us, we urge you to be reconciled to God. And we often talk about an ambassador from one country to another.
That's how I always present it.
But when Paul wrote that, it was the Roman Empire. There weren't other countries. So what was an ambassador from Rome to these outlying areas?
Don't tell them now. Tell me after so that I can preach it on Sunday.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. Well, the word for ambassador, you know this.
Maybe.
And I know this.
Surely. One
other person in the church knows it. Nobody else does.
Okay.
The word that Paul's used for ambassador is the word elder.
Okay.
And you'll explain that on Sunday.
I'll explain it on Sunday.
Yeah.
So the idea of everything is coming to, all these different threads are being woven together to get to the mission of the Christian,
mm-hmm.
to beg people to be reconciled to God. The doctrine of imputed righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
He made him who knew no sin to be sin. The concept of our eternal home.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when we die, which brings in this tabernacle temple imagery, which we talked about on Sunday, and also the being clothed
mm-hmm.
to be able to stand in the presence of God unashamed.
Yeah, to please God, whether we're at home in the body or whether we're
so it brings in the thread of obedience.
Yeah. And another thing, chapter 6
mm-hmm.
should start 2 verses later.
Okay, so this Sunday I should cover the first 2 verses of chapter 6.
I think that'd be a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's coming in chapter 6?
The window's going to close. Because in the first 2 verses of chapter 6, it says, now is the day of salvation. But someday it won't be that anymore. And so there's an urgency about it.
Mm-hmm. And what I'm looking forward to in chapter 6 as well is how do Christians carry themselves in such a fallen world, an evil and crooked generation in which we shine like stars, to use a different passage.
And sometimes we stub our own toe by things we do that cause offense to other people, and then that makes it harder for them to hear the real gospel.
Yeah.
And that chapter 6 talks about that.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that's a question we get a lot. In fact, I got we get our comment cards. They're not comment cards.
No.
They're connection cards. We don't do comment cards because the point of corporate worship isn't to take feedback. It's to participate together.
Mm-hmm.
But we do get sometimes we get comments on the prayer cards, and we got one this week about how come we're not doing more to speak directly to current issues, like the Roe v. Wade stuff, the stuff going on in the Supreme Court leak, the gender stuff going on. This person listed, even things like the stuff going on at the border.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the question on this card was, why don't we do more specific
mm-hmm.
to those issues? How would you respond to that? Because I know how I'll respond to it before we're done. But
yeah. Well, I think that our focus is not to be a discussion group about current events. It's certainly not a political debate. It's a worship service. And we hear from God. We hear the timeless principles, the eternal perspective that allows us to then look at what's going on in my family, in my neighborhood, in the world from an eternal perspective. And I think that's much more helpful than just saying, okay, this is our position on all these things that are going on around us.
Yeah. And the philosophy I have of corporate worship, and you might want to write this down if you're watching, is that it's corporate and that it's worship. It's not a revival meeting. necessarily. It's not a stump speech for any sort of political thing. And the winds of change happen so quickly in terms of current events and the 24-hour news cycle, which isn't even 24 hours anymore. It's as fast as your Twitter feed can be. And occasionally, very occasionally, a particular event to me crosses over into the people of God need to circle the wagons and talk openly about it.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean it never happens. It does happen sometimes. And like a couple of years ago, we did a whole racial message because of some of the race riots that were going on during early COVID and things like that. I think the Roe v. Wade thing is certainly a spiritual matter. It's not just politics. So I don't want to ever say we're apolitical and so we'll never talk about these things, because most of these issues are bigger than politics.
Yeah,
they're very much spiritual issues. I guess politics is spiritual too, but you get my point. Like some of these things certainly bleed over beyond just the news cycle.
Well, and also the kingdom of the world is not going to do kingdom of God work.
Right.
We can't expect that. We can't fear what they're going to do. We can't hope for what they're going to do. It's going to be God's power at work that we look to.
Yeah, and I think on one hand, if we chase every news thing, then we're chasing it forever.
Yeah.
And Paul talks quite a bit about avoiding certain issues because they're going to get in the way of the work that you're supposed to do. So sometimes people say, well, you're avoiding, like I remember this 20 years ago when the Harry Potter books were all coming out. And somebody came up to me and said, how come you aren't preaching about the evils of Harry Potter? And my answer was, well, I'm avoiding that. Like, you're avoiding it? Like, yeah, that's irresponsible. And then I was able to quote, avoid foolish controversies. Yeah. Like it's right there in the Bible to avoid. These aren't necessarily foolish controversies like that one was. And I know somebody's watching this, they're like, oh, that's not foolish at all. That's a terrible, like, no, I avoided it. I will continue to avoid it. But some of these we should meet. I just don't think Sunday worship is the time to do that. Yeah. A classroom discussion is a great place for that. Also, the things we do cover in corporate worship, particularly 2 Corinthians 1-5 so far, I think do speak to a lot of these things. Yeah. How do we be ambassadors or elders for speaking for God? It's to plead with people to be reconciled to God. It's not to plant our flag on an issue that might be kingdom adjacent, but isn't the gospel itself. Yeah. And so people who have very strong opinions, I'm just going to use this because it is the current issue of Roe versus Wade. Do I as a pastor, do we as a church have a conviction about the topic of abortion? Absolutely. How many people in the Sunday service, how many women in our Sunday morning services have had an abortion? I don't know the answer, but I promise you it's not zero. Is that the time and the place for the political rhetoric? How do we do that with grace? How do we do that with a long view of the redemptive plan of God? Is there time in a 30-minute sermon to accomplish all of that? Yeah. That, again, the purpose of these Tuesday breakdowns is to get you behind the curtain of how pastors think about these things. And I think that's a really important question, but I want to give an equally important answer. Because if we just treat it as a particular Republican issue and how come we don't turn our church into that, that's why. It's because the gospel is bigger than Republicans or Democrats. And the gospel will get perverted if we make it into something like that. And the gospel is for the individual who's in the room, where you can't just paint everything with a single brush. Yeah. And so these are the things that enter my head. And so when I get a question like that, that's my answer. Are these things important? Absolutely. Are they spiritual as well as political? Absolutely. Is corporate worship the best time to accomplish? Usually not. Yeah. I don't know. You've done this a lot longer than I have, and you've navigated other issues socially that I haven't.
And I think the question naturally comes up was, well, when are we going to have a time to do that? And I think it ought to be in a prayer meeting.
Prayer meeting?
I think that's the appropriate place when we gather together to lay this before the Lord, to fast and pray and to seek the Lord for his wisdom, for his providence over what's happening in the world. I think that's the right place.
Yeah.
And then you can have the ministry to people that are involved in it in one way or another, who need grace and nurturing and discipling.
Yeah, because none of these things happen in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And in particular, the things that are mentioned on this card, gender identity issues for a teenager right now, the last thing they need is some pastor up there saying, the Bible says this, therefore, wag your finger.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's part of the reason they're in the straits they're in now and why people are leaving the church is because we've done such a bad job of speaking the language of the people who are really struggling with this. And, but again, does that mean I don't have a particular position or conviction on that? No, that's not what it means at all. Anyway, hence these Tuesday breakdowns. It's a chance for us to talk about stuff like that. And I feel like, I guess I'm taking the long way around to get back to, I think what we've been talking about in 2 Corinthians 5 really does speak to this kind of stuff. Because it does speak to how God has designed us. What is our identity in Christ? What is his long-term plan for his redemption strategy for us? And then what is our job in the midst of that? And it's to implore people to be reconciled to God because the love of Christ compels us.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you, do that instead of fight for a political battle.
Yeah.
Where the world's kingdom can't solve it anyway.
I noticed we're gone over the half hour.
Yeah.
Is that because of me?
No, I get ranty.
Oh. Okay.
And most people are okay with it going a little long. I'll tell you, when I watch these later, I watch it at 2 times speed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I highly recommend it. So if you're watching now, thank you for making it 37 minutes with us. You want to salute?
Okay.
I do a salute here on Tuesdays.
Oh, is it wrong hand?
I don't know. It's
No,
we're
it's
flipped.
backwards.
No,
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, for those of you watching now, awesome. Hi, it's Debbie. So glad to hear all of this. Thank you, Debbie. We love you. You're very faithful. For those of you watching later, not Debbie, but others who watch later, you're also awesome. And you can watch it at whatever speed you want. You can slow it down to half speed.
I don't recommend that.
And we go very slow. I'll be back Thursday with some update videos. Again, please be a part of our adult ed stuff that we do. It's very important as part of what we do. This guy's awesome, and I am a better man because of him. And so thank you for being a part of what we do. Thank you for watching this. We will catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.